Turning our attention from issues of background and context to the paper itself, let's focus now on the analytic project, that is, the analysis that comprises the bulk of this paper. Moore introduces the problem of the proof of an external world through the introduction of a particular phrase, things outside us. And using that phrase, he begins the project of analysis. He compares that phrase, things outside us, with the phrase, things to be met with in space. Then he compares the phrase, things outside us, with the phrase, things external to our minds. He further refines his analysis, then, by comparing those two terms, things to be met with in space and things external to our minds, in virtue of their implications if we were to say that there are things. How do they differ from one another in terms of the consequences of the antecedent of this conditional? If there are things, then there are things to be met with in space, and if there are things, then there are things external to our minds. Moore introduces and frames the analysis project by quoting Kant to the effect that there is a scandal in philosophy because there is no satisfactory proof of the existence of, and that introduces our phrase, things outside us. He then goes on to clarify what he thinks things outside us really means. And there are 2 points of interest for us here. First, there's the product of that analysis. And second, there is the fact that those who are familiar with analytic philosophy will not immediately recognize these passages as instances of analytic philosophy. And that's because they really aren't. They're instances of analysis, but they're instances of Moore's flavor of analysis. So if we were to think about the differences between Moore's approach to analysis and the approach to analysis that Americans were probably more familiar with, the sort of analysis that would be championed by analytic philosopher Roderick Chisholm, we can see how the products of this analysis are going to differ dramatically, as well as the techniques of the analysis. So for Chisholm, our goal is to formulate a theory about conceptual membership within some concept that we are analyzing in terms of a set of individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions that capture all and only the instances of that class. We develop this analysis by proposing such definitions and then subjecting them to counterexamples. When our counterexample proves powerful enough to cause problems for analysis, we try to modify the analysis to eliminate those problems and further refine our theory. And so when Chisholm is talking about something like analytic philosophy, he's going to be saying things like, something is analytic philosophy if and only if it produces definitions giving the necessary and sufficient conditions of important terms, or shows how particular definitions fail to capture necessary and sufficient conditions. And this is far, far different from the project that we see Moore engaging in. So like Chisholm, Moore is attempting to analyze ordinary terms and phrases, but his ordinary terms and phrases aren't necessarily exclusively limited to philosophically important concepts. So he's more than happy to talk about the analysis of a phrase like, here is a cow. However, in his analyses, he seeks to understand the definendum, not in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions, but in terms of less puzzling or imprecise terms or phrases that aren't logically equivalent in the sense of Chisholm's analysis, but more in the sense of synonyms, or in the sense of words that can be substituted within the context salva veritatis to preserve the truth value of the statement in the context. As a result, when Moore engages in analysis, we see him performing analysis in ways that are similar to Chisholm. So he'll perform an analysis by discussing a term or phrase in relationship to other terms or phrases. However, he'll also do other things that you won't typically see when you look at someone like Chisholm. So he'll do things like make lists of terms that are encompassed by definition or instances of a concept. He'll be satisfied with an analysis, moreover, even though on some occasions there is vagueness still left or ambiguity still left in the definite. So there won't be this resolution into a set of individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. We'll gain increased clarity and for more, that is success. When Moore turns his attention to analysis in the context of our article, he begins his analysis of things outside us by noticing that the relevant sense of the phrase things outside us is captured by two different phrases, things to be met with in space and external to our minds, by which he means, and I'll be quoting him to make sure that we get that flavor of his analysis, all things of the sort that philosophers have been used to call quote-unquote physical objects, quote-unquote material things, or quote-unquote bodies. However, there are two important caveats that he'll immediately introduce. This phrase, to be met with in space, only serves the purpose if, on the one hand, you understand it in a sense in which many things, for example, after images, double images, bodily pains, and so on, which might be said to be present in space, are nevertheless not to be reckoned as things to be met with in space. Additionally, you realize clearly that there is no contradiction in supposing that there have been and are to be met with in space things which never have been, are not now, and never will be perceived, nor in supposing that among those of them which have at some time been perceived, many existed at times when they were not perceived.